Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. I have a very special guest with me tonight. I have Jon Perry from Stated Clearly and Stated Casually. The links to his channel are in the description. And in a moment, I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself. A little background of why we are here. A couple of weeks ago, probably about 3 weeks ago, I moderated a debate on the Non Sequitur channel between our friend Jon here and my other friend Steve MacRae on whether or not DNA was a code. And that the debate became frustrating for some people viewing and for some people who were participating, myself included, because I felt like a lot of people were talking past each other. So we're going to have a little bit of a post-mortem breakdown today because it's just so that we can clarify some of the communication issues that may have been had, and also kind of go over why it was such an important topic to discuss. So if you haven't watched the debate, there's a link to the debate in the description down below, but you don't need to have watched the debate in order for this conversation to be valuable. So thank you everybody for joining. And as always, if you have a question, please send a super chat. I have that open so that I can see. I'm also going to try my best to pay attention to the chat. I'm getting better. I promise I am. I'm getting better. But make sure that you at me, at Shannon Q, so that I can see it. It'll show up in red. I have it open on this sidebar. So without further ado, please, Jon, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you and what you're all about. And then we'll get right into it.
All right. I am an online educator. I do animations about genetics and evolution, and I work for different universities, different research groups. So one of the big groups that I've been working with is the Center for Chemical Evolution at Georgia Tech. They're studying the origin of life, and they focus a lot on things like the genetic code and molecular symbiosis and some of these kind of more abstract concepts for a lot of people. And so I do animations that take their science and simplify that for the public. And those animations are on my YouTube channel, Stated Clearly. There's also a website, statedclearly.com. And then I also have a second channel, Stated Casually, where I just kind of make casual videos, less intensive. Animation takes a lot of work. There's a lot of things involved in that. And I'm also...
Oh, Jon froze. You're frozen, Jon. Oh, no. See if I can get Jon to unfreeze. Oh, gracious. For anybody who's wondering, the reason that we were doing it now as opposed to immediately after is because Jon just moved from the Western United States to the eastern part of Canada. So we didn't have an opportunity to now because that's a little bit labor intensive.
Everything is worded.
Oh, you're back. Jon, you're roboting quite a bit. We're losing you, my friends. Can people I'm looking at the chat. Can people in the chat hear Jon? And maybe it's just on my end? Or is it? Didn't watch the debate. Oh, goodness. Are you back, Jon? Yes.
Yeah. I don't know what happened there. So
we lost you.
Where were we?
You were just explaining what you did. You got to about the point where you said that you had a website and that the animations were very, very labor intensive.
Yeah. So Stated Casually is a channel where I just kind of talk about things more loosely. And so, yeah. And then the other thing that I do sometimes is debates and stuff online. So
awesome. All right. Well, we have our first super chat. Thank you, Clade. Clade, I donated 20 Australian dollars. So thank you. I don't know what that and said my DNA code told me to donate. So thank you, Clade. Clade's apparently Team Jon. So cool. We'll get started with kind of talking about why this is important and what brought you to decide to do the debate to begin with.
Yeah. So I've been teaching genetics actually the very first video that I did was what is DNA and how does it work? And in that video, I introduced the genetic code for the first time. So that's where they learned that in the genetic, so 3 nucleotides, which tell the cell, specifically that tell the ribosome, which amino acid to grab.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, did I freeze again?
You did, bud. You did. You keep roboting really, really badly. If you have anything else open, maybe close it or hit F5. That'll help you refresh the feed. Oh, goodness. If you hit F5, that might help. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties. Gracious. And now he's just completely frozen, and I have him white boxed. So hi everybody. So Jon, oh, are you back, Jon? Oh, gracious. He moved to Canada and everything flew off the rails, and now he's gone entirely. So we'll wait for Jon to come back in. He's going to come back in. So I'm really sorry about the tech difficulties, guys. We're getting them out of the way early in the stream so that we can get into the crux of what's important here, which is why DNA is apparently a code or is not a code. If anybody did watch the debate, there was some issues in communication between the differentiation of whether or not DNA was analogous to a code or was a code itself, and whether or not the actual chemicals that are in DNA could qualify as a code because of their designation. Because in order for it to be a code in the cryptography definition, you would have to have symbols, and since chemicals are not symbols, it could not be considered a code. So that was a point of contention, sort of a brief synopsis of a point of contention that was had there. Oh, and I think that Jon's back.
Yes.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi, Jon.
What's going on? We're having Canadian internet issues.
Canada's the worst, man. I'm telling you.
Well, where was I when I cut out?
You were talking about how you were one of your first videos was educating people on DNA. So go ahead.
Yeah, so explaining what a codon is and how it is that codons interact with the ribosome to summon amino acids, different amino acids. You got 20 different amino acids, and you've got a bunch of different codons which summon those. And that's the basics of the genetic code. I could show people what the codon chart looks like, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen here.
Please do.
And so here on screen, we've got, here is the codon chart. And so all of these letters here is a set of 3 letters, UUU. Those are sequences of RNA, actually, which code for a specific amino acid in a protein chain. So there's a structure called the ribosome inside of your cells that builds proteins, and it builds these proteins according to the message sent to it, which is written in RNA. So RNA is a series of nucleotides, and there are U's, A's, C's, and G's. That's what we call them, but they're actually just molecules. So here on my image here, I've got 3 guanine molecules. And every 3 molecules in a chain of RNA tell the ribosome which amino acid to grab next as it's building a protein. And so there is a communication system that exists inside your cell between the genome, between your genes, and the ribosome. And that communication system, what it does is it tells genes tell the ribosome how to build proteins. That's what's going on here. And so when we talk about the origin of the genetic code, we're talking about the origin of this communication system. How did chains of DNA start talking to ribosomes and telling them how to build proteins? That's what the genetic code is all about. That's what this question is. Like, where did this communication system come from? And when we talk about a code in computer science, when we talk about a code is the set of rules that govern a communication system. So you've got ASCII code, which is the zeros and ones that we're all familiar with if you've watched The Matrix. That's what computers are using, the ASCII code, to communicate, to send messages. So all of the messages that different computer parts are sending and receiving from one to another are written in ASCII code, zeros and ones. In DNA, things are written, these different molecules that make up RNA are the symbols in this communication system. And in this case, we have 4 symbols. We have U, C, A, and G. Those are our symbols. and they come in sets of 3, which kind of act like words, you could say, to summon specific amino acids. And this chart right here is what we use, is what the genetic code uses. It's what the communication system in our cells use when building proteins. And this code was cracked in the 70s. Scientists finally were able to figure this out by carefully observing what's going on here when proteins are being constructed by ribosomes. And they were able to figure out this code through it was a lot of work to try and figure this out. A lot of people, creationists have seen this and they've said, oh, there's a code inside that our cells are using to communicate, for parts of our cells to communicate with other parts of our cells. There's this communication system, there's this code. Well, they make this argument that says all codes are designed by an intelligent designer. The genetic code is a legitimate code. Therefore, the genetic code was intelligently designed. And this is an argument that a lot of creationists have been using. And I'm not sure why, but in order to combat that, a lot of people have tried to attack the idea that the genetic code really is a code. That's what I've seen a lot happen in the comments on my videos and elsewhere. That's actually the wrong thing to attack. The genetic code really is a code according to how we define codes in computer science. The thing that the creationists are wrong about is this idea that codes have to be invented by an intelligent designer. There are natural codes and there are constructed codes. The code that your computer uses was a constructed code. The genetic code is one of many natural codes that exist. There are actually lots of different communication systems in our bodies. You have hormones that act as, there's a communication system that we talk about when we're talking about our hormones. When we look in nature, different animals communicate with other animals through complex communication systems. A bee and a flower, they're actually communicating back and forth to each other. Mainly the flower is communicating with the bee, saying, I've got nectar and pollen, come get it. And the flower has evolved to do this because it helps the flower survive and reproduce. I mean, bees are helping the flower reproduce when they pollinate. So nature is full of communication systems. The genetic code is the set of rules governing a very ancient communication system that exists in our cells, and it actually exists in all cells. All cells use slightly different versions of the genetic code in some cases, but for the most part, all organisms use the same genetic code. The same rules exist in this protein building system. So that's what the genetic code is. And this is important because scientifically, this is really important because we want to know exactly how it is that the genetic code came about. How is it that communication systems in general emerge? And how is it specifically that the genetic code emerged in this communication system that exists in our cells? So to ignore it and to say that it's not really a code really is a shame, because it stops us from asking really interesting questions. It puts a halt to our learning here. And I've seen a lot of people do that seemingly so they can win arguments with creationists. And I think that's an unfortunate for many reasons. But so that's why I think this is important.
Okay. I'm going to have to kind of play devil's advocate here a little bit. And I have a couple questions, and they're the things that maybe frustrated me the most. And I didn't feel like they were sussed out as well as they could have been. So this seemed like semantics to me, and I could be wrong. And I'm certain that Steve will tell me why he thinks I am. But he seemed to be wanting to refer to it as a cipher, as opposed to a code. And that just seemed, like a mild semantic shift in differentiation to me between, what a code was and what a cipher was, like labeling it a cipher. Didn't seem like a big differentiation to me from labeling it a code. So I didn't understand why that needed to take place. Maybe you understood a little bit better than I did. Were you getting that as well?
Yeah. Well, I was confused by that too. And I didn't really address it very well during the debate. Are you seeing me or are you seeing my screen still?
No, I'm seeing you.
Okay. So yeah, during the debate, I wasn't able to really catch that very well because I wasn't super familiar with the special terminology, not in computer science, but in cryptography.
Right.
So in the specific field of cryptography, code is defined in a very specific way. And there's a difference between a code and a cipher within the field of cryptography. But it's kind of like when creationists bring this up, what they're talking about is they're talking about computer code. You know, we're finding code in the cell and we find code in our computers. We know where the code in our computer came from. It came from an intelligent designer. And so we assume that the code in our cells must have come from that too. To ignore computer science and talk about cryptography, I mean, there are computer scientists that do cryptography, but to go into that specific definition, it's kind of like, so what is this, Shannon? What is it that I'm holding here?
It's a fork. It's a fork. Did I get it? Did I win? Is it a fork?
No, you're wrong. This is not a fork, because I looked up on the internet the definition of a fork, and I found that in the field of cartography, a fork is defined as a split in a road or a river. Does this look like a river to you? Is this a road?
I guess it's not a fork. I was wrong.
Checkmate. So
Darn it.
That's what was happening during the debate. He wanted to use the definition in cryptography instead of the definition that everybody's using when they're making this argument. Right. Is that, you know, it's code like in computer code. And I didn't catch that until I watched it later. I rewatched it later. Right. And that was like, I think that was the main holdup of the whole discussion, was that he wanted to use that different definition. And he wasn't being as silly as I was just there, because I think he didn't know that computer science defines things one way and cryptography defines it a different way. I think he might have just thought that it was all the same thing. And so, and there was also a quote that he had from one of the guys that discovered the DNA, who was saying the same thing, that he was using he talked about the genetic code once using the cryptography definition, but that definition is not what people are using when they're talking about the genetic code today. When people are talking about the code today, they're talking about communication systems definition, the definition in computer science, which the genetic code certainly is a code according to computer science, the definition used in computer science, the definition used in communication systems. So,
okay. I have a few more things to bring up. I reeled after this for a while. So, because I felt like there was so much talking past. So what the most frustrating thing to me by far is the fact that we could, from my perspective, we could look at it and at the very least see that it was analogous to a code, even though there weren't, letters, even though DNA isn't made of actual letters. We could at least make the assertion and the assumption, like, fairly with a high degree of certainty that it's analogous to it. And I believe even on the after show, we had some of those concessions. But when I said, okay, well, what is it then? Everybody just said, it's not a code. Yeah. It's not a code. Categorically not a code. Okay, well, how do you define it? Well, we don't even have a word to define it. I'm like, well, then where do we go from here then? I don't understand what to do now. Did you find that too? Like,
oh yeah, that was really frustrating. Well, okay, so there's actually two concerns here. So Steve's concerns were, he was talking about cryptography, right? While I was talking about computer science, but the Dr. Mays had a different concern, and that is that students get confused when he uses the word code. And so I've taught a lot of students this, but I teach them online, or I'll go to a class and I'll teach them for one day. Right. And so I don't have the experience he has where he follows them through an entire semester, sometimes through their entire college career. Yeah. To really know what sticks and what doesn't, where confusions come up and where they don't. So I think that listening to his concern is really important here. He's saying that students get confused when you talk about the genetic code being a code because they think that a code has to be created by a person. And so he thinks that we should have some other word for it. And there isn't one right now. Right. So he was saying that we shouldn't call it a code because its origin is different. It does function as a code now, but its origin is different, so we should call it something different. And I think the solution to that is to use this solution that's found in linguistics. In linguistics, you have natural languages and you have constructed languages. So Esperanto is a constructed language. It was invented. Someone sat down and invented it. And then you have English, which is a natural language. It evolved within a culture. And so you have natural languages and constructed languages. And I think maybe the solution would be to just, when teaching, early on, when you first start teaching about the genetic code, just explain that this is a natural code. And we do know how codes evolve naturally. And in a computer, you've got a constructed code, and that's actually built by a person. I think it probably is really important to drive that point home, because it'd be interesting to try this out in a classroom and see if that actually helps or not. And Dr. Mays would be able to do that. I could try with videos and see what happens, but it's kind of hard for me to get feedback because I don't follow these students for the long term like he does. But
right.
So that was his concern. Hopefully I've explained it properly.
Yeah,
but
I understand.
Yeah. And that's a legitimate concern. I mean, this is as far as teaching tactics go, or teaching strategies go, he's concerned that using the word code is bad for that reason. So
it kind of all just depends on your perspective and what your ultimate end game is. So Steve's perspective was looking at it from like a really specific drilled down cryptography focus, and from his perspective, it didn't fit that very specific definition. And from Herman's perspective, who is also, I really like Herman, he's a really cool guy, and it wasn't an effective teaching tool because he needs to be able to impart that information onto students and have them understand that there's a differentiation between things that are created and things that occur naturally, and that word itself is imbued with the implication that it was something that was created, and that's a detriment to him when he's teaching and trying to get the students to understand these concepts. But there wasn't a solution to that. So but nobody was arguing it's not a code, it is this instead, with the exception of Steve saying it's a cipher, which to me, literally, it just seemed like semantics to somebody who didn't have that specialization in cryptography. It seemed like semantics to me. It's just saying it's this specific type of code is what I heard every time he said cipher.
There was another argument that I think someone else made in the after show that the genetic code is neither a cipher, it's not a code, it's just a chemical reaction. And the genetic code is powered by chemical reactions, but there's a very specific system. The molecules in the genetic code really do act as symbols. So, CUU acts as a symbol for leucine. So CCU in the genetic code it summons leucine. CCU is not leucine. Or sorry, CUU is not leucine. It's not leucine itself. It summons it. It acts as a symbol. When the ribosome receives the CUU codon, it automatically grabs leucine out of its surroundings. And these rules do not have to be the way that they are. There's nothing chemically that says that CUU has to represent leucine. This is something that evolved within this communication system, just like a dog's bark doesn't have to represent anxiety, or alarm, but that's what dogs have. That's what's evolved within the communication system between dogs and humans, and they'll alert us to danger by barking. But they could have alerted us to danger with any other sound, or understanding chemicals as signals is really weird to humans, because all of the symbols that we use are sounds, and we use visual symbols. So to think of a molecule as a symbol is really strange to us, but actually molecules as symbols happen all the time in nature. Different animals use smells to communicate with each other. Hyenas will mark their territory with a smell instead of a sound or a visual cue. They use smells. They use molecules. They excrete these molecules, and these molecules mean different things. But they don't mean anything to us. To us, it's just a weird smell. To another hyena, they know exactly what oh, this is a female, she's in heat, she's looking for a mate, or this is a female, she's in heat, but she has a partner. These are molecular symbols that they're getting by smelling these things. And that's really abstract to us. So that is a big confusion that I saw a lot of people having in the comments when I was looking at this again, is how is it the molecules act as symbols? But
so did you find that was the biggest sticking point? Like, if you could, okay, this is a good question. Well, I think it's good. Good job, Shannon. Yeah. I'm about to ask a really good question. It's a great question. So if you could do it again, from my communication standpoint, these are the types of questions that I like the answers to. If you could go back and do it again, what do you feel like you would have approached or communicated differently to be more effective at the time? Like, that looking back on going, oh, at that moment, I wish I had said this instead or posed it this way. Like, what do you see were the biggest hangups, and how would you have done it differently or would you go forward?
Well, I think the most important thing would be to have pinpointed that he's using a different he's looking at a different field of research. Right. He's not using code in the way that creationists are always using code when they're talking about this. He's not using the word code in the same way that the life origins researchers use the word code when they're studying the origin of the genetic code. So he's not using it the way that other people in the field are using it. He's using the wrong field, the wrong definition from the wrong field to define a code. And I didn't catch that. It was just because I wasn't familiar with cryptography enough. I didn't catch that's what was happening. So I mean that's the obvious thing. And then I think, afterwards in the second discussion with Dr. Mays, I think it was just I guess being able to listen better as to, just being able to stop and step back and figure out where it is that we're disagreeing, where it is that we're agreeing. It was really hard in the after debate because there were so many people in there. And then, so you couldn't even stop and talk. And as soon as you make a point, someone else is talking about something that's slightly different. So there's a lot of confusion there. Anyway, I don't know if that helped clarify things.
No, it did for me. I always like asking those questions because I like to see how people kind of analyze their own individual communication strategies too. So I have more questions for you.
All right.
So in the debates, you mentioned, or it might have been the after show, I can't remember which it was. You said that looking at it as a code was really, really important to researchers because we've made discoveries by approaching it as though it is a code, and that has helped us in research. Can you give some examples of why it is important to have that, to view it in that manner and to label it that way?
Yeah. Well, so it's really important because when we understand this as a communication system, so the genome is communicating with the ribosome. When we look at it from a communication system, that allows us to apply everything that we know from signaling theory, which is the field of science that studies how communication systems evolve in animals, and apply that to biological molecules. And this is the direction that some researchers are looking at. They're looking at how does symbiosis evolve between molecules, because when we look at animals, when animals evolve communication systems, this happens when there is selection pressure for cooperation. So you've got two organisms that live together in some sort of environment, and for some reason, the skills that these two different organisms have evolved work really well together, and they can actually help each other survive and reproduce if they work together. And when that happens, when these two organisms come together in an environment, any mutation that helps them cooperate with each other better will be selected for. Nature will promote that. Just, natural selection working. And you get symbiosis to evolve. And as a byproduct of symbiosis, almost always, not every time, there are special cases where it doesn't happen, but almost all the time there's communication that occurs between these two organisms. They will actually evolve symbols that one can send to another. Technically we call these signals. In that field, we call them signals. So it's a little bit different than in computer science, where we talk about symbols. We call those signals. but you'll have this complex set of signals that are being sent back and forth between these two organisms, which allows them to coordinate their behavior. And we're now looking at the genome more and more and more. So all the set of genes and just sequences of DNA that an organism has in its genome. We're looking at individual sequences of DNA as if they are organisms and as if they are either cooperating with each other. And so sometimes they're locked in symbiosis. They have to cooperate with each other. They've been cooperating for so long. Or sometimes there are actually certain genes that are competing with other genes in the genome. And so looking at the genome from the perspective of ecology, as all the different sequences of DNA as organisms, there's been a lot of advances in genetics because of this. We're able to make sense of all sorts of weird things that didn't make sense before. And this view of the genome as a bunch of organisms cooperating with each other, this is something that Richard Dawkins first put forth in his book, The Selfish Gene. And it's progressed a lot since then. But understanding the genetic code as a communication system that evolved between cooperating molecules is really important for us to help us understand where the heck it came from.
So do you think if we viewed it or labeled it differently, then, or like if these conversations keep happening where people want to label it differently, either for, reasons that they legitimately see it as deserving of a different label, or because they fear that if they keep this label the same, that they're, I guess, arming apologists with a label that allows them to mislead people.
Yeah.
Which, there's a legitimate concern. I understand that, but I don't think that's the answer. But if we labeled it differently or viewed it differently, would you think that it would have an effect on the efficacy of that approach to science?
Well, okay. So if people say the genetic code is not a real code, it's just a chemical reaction, that would definitely ruin that. I mean, you cannot understand what's going on there at all if you're just looking at it as a chemical reaction, because it is an evolved chemical system. It's an entire system. It's not just a chemical reaction. So if you try and reduce it to just a chemical reaction, that's super detrimental. If you were to give it all the same definitions but just change the words, then you could do that. You'd have to convince everybody in the field of genetics to stop calling it a code. And I mean, this argument is not happening in the scientific community. It's only happening outside the science. It's only happening with educators and mainly with atheists and creationists is where it's happening. Yeah. So I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that geneticists are going to rename everything because of this argument that's happening on the sidelines.
That can be dangerous though, because this is one of the other things that frustrated me in the after show is if what's important to you is how people perceive it and what people are learning and what information people are able to adequately and accurately assimilate, then obfuscating the language in order to be, pedantic and particular isn't the biggest and most important argument to have. If the people that are in the field have labeled it as such, and that it being labeled in that fashion, analogous or otherwise, is allowing them to take great strides in the research, shouldn't we as communicators and educators find a way to better impart and transmit that information as opposed to arguing the efficacy of the terms? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I say maybe the solution is just to say there's natural codes and there are constructed codes.
So parsimonious. I like it.
Yeah, because I think that solves the problem. And maybe it doesn't, but I think that would solve the problem. It should. But
just give it a different differentiation, just so that people don't have that, oh my gosh, my heart's aflutter because I'm afraid somebody's going to think that means that this is designed.
Right.
And
right. But, and the other problem, and Dr. Mays agreed with me on this too, is that you've got the creationists that are misunderstanding things on purpose, and you can't do anything about that. If someone wants to misunderstand it, they're going to misunderstand it. You can't do anything to change that. So we shouldn't change our language because of the tactics that creationists are using. And he agreed with me on that, but he said that it was so confusing for his students to talk about this as a code that he thinks we should call it something else. Yeah, I mean, if Dr. Mays has enough pull in the scientific community to get them to completely change their vocabulary, then that's great. But if not, then it's up to educators to find a way to, like,
right,
find a way to teach the students better.
That is obviously there's going to be people in the world that are going to, see this as an opportunity to, misrepresent something. But
yeah.
I agree with you. Our job isn't to say, okay, well, now we have to completely change how we refer to this because they're taking advantage of, a loophole in the vernacular.
Yeah.
Our job is to be effective enough communicators that we can overcome them attempting to utilize that loophole.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think a lot of the debate though happens because people outside of genetics, and actually I guess some people in genetics too, that have just they don't really focus on the origin of this or focus on the mechanics of this, or don't understand how code works. That's another thing. A lot of people who don't really understand communication theory, they'll fall into this idea that maybe the code is just analogous to a code. It's not really a code. It's not really a communication system. But if you look at communication theory, it really is a communication system. If you look at signaling theory, which when we study communication in animals, there really is communication going on in the cell here, just like there is between two organisms that are cooperating, just like the shrimp and its symbiotic guppy or goby. That the goby, that they have this set of signals that they use with each other. The goby will move its tail in a certain way, and the shrimp knows what that means, and they work with each other. In the same way that a system like that evolves, this system evolved between molecules, and understanding that's super interesting. But a lot of people either don't understand genetics or they don't understand communication theory. And so they'll say, oh, it's just chemical reactions. Because again, it's powered by chemical reactions. But
so what is the definition of a code within communication theory? The one that would apply to the one that you're using when referring to a code?
A code is a set of rules governing a communication system. So that's what the code is. So the code, someone had asked, well, how come there's so much junk code in biology? What coding system has so much junk? That's confusing the message with the code. So the code is a set of rules that govern a communication system. And so we've got this chart that shows which codons summon a particular amino acid. That's the genetic code. A gene is a message that's written in the language of the genetic code. So it's written according to the rules of the genetic code. So when we talk about junk DNA, we're talking about large stretches of DNA that don't even use the genetic code. They don't use it at all. They just exist. There's large sequences of DNA that exist in our genome. They don't code for proteins. So that's a misunderstanding of the code versus the message, right?
So you wouldn't say, so would that make DNA itself the code, or would it be the RNA talking to the ribosome, like that? So it would be the system of communication that's the code then, right? So the RNA talking to the ribosome to form the proteins would be the part where it becomes a code. So like DNA existing over here by itself isn't communicating; it's just existing.
Right.
Right.
Let me share my screen again.
Yeah, sure. I'll wipe out.
So this here, this is the genetic code. This box shows you the set of rules that govern the communication system. So DNA is just a molecule that's used in the genetic code, just like letters are symbols used in English to write.
Right.
Individual nucleotides of DNA are just symbols that are used in the genetic code. So, you wouldn't call a bowl of alphabet soup, you wouldn't call that a code, right?
Yeah.
So, and the same reason you wouldn't call DNA a code.
Okay.
It's the set of rules that you use in English to write with. That is the code. It's the language, right?
Okay.
One of the confusions with this is a lot of times in computer science, people will say, hey, look at the code that I wrote. And you'll go look at the code that they wrote, and they've written a page of, PHP or whatever. They didn't write code. They wrote a message using code. PHP is the coding language that they use to write a message.
Right.
But that's just sloppiness in speech. Even when you talk to a computer programmer, they know the difference. They're just being lazy in their speech, which is fine. But so if someone says that, a lot of times you'll hear people say, your genetic code is different than my genetic code. What they're actually saying is that the messages written in your DNA are different than the messages written into mine. That's what they're actually saying.
Okay.
Does that make sense? That little...
Yeah, so DNA contains the code. The code itself is when DNA, when the protein coding takes place. That's when there's rules that are governing the system. So I'm not sure how to, because obviously you wouldn't say DNA is a code because it's sitting over here, like I said, by itself.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say that's a code. You would just say, that's a molecule of DNA.
Right.
So at what point would you give it the designation of a code while it's communicating? It is coding at that point in time.
Yeah. The code is just the set of rules governing the communication system. So,
okay.
It's the set of rules that we see in this chart. UUU, or CUU codes for leucine. That's the rule that's governing the coding of leucine. And there's other ones. CUC also codes for leucine. CUA also codes for leucine. There's some redundancy in the genetic code, but these are the rules that govern that system.
Gotcha.
Maybe that's confusing for people too. But this is something that starts to make sense when you understand communication theory. And, it's something that makes sense when you start learning how to code, learning what codes are, how they work. But so there's lots of reasons that people are confused about this. It's not super easy to come in and just understand how a code works, right?
Yeah. Or why it would be.
Yeah.
I went into this blind. I know. Well, if nothing else, I have learned more about DNA coding for proteins or RNA coding for proteins for the ribosome than I've ever imagined I would have learned in the past 3 weeks. So there's that benefit. There's those benefits to these types of conversations, right? Because everybody who's watching is being imparted with a little bit of knowledge about the subject matter. So I appreciate that you took the time to go over it again, especially considering how I was enormously frustrated at the end. You could definitely tell I was in the after show.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah. Oh, so was I. Yeah.
I got a little yelly. I got a little yelly. I'm still looking at your chart.
Yeah. Okay. I'm back.
So
are we getting questions from the audience at all?
I'm not. I'm awful at paying attention. Maybe. Does anybody have any questions? If you have any questions at me, we've got about 15 or 20 minutes or so left. So mostly people are fighting, it looks like.
Yeah. What are they fighting about?
Whether or not DNA is a code, I think.
Okay.
Let's see. All soup is a code, apparently. That reference to your alphabet soup.
Yeah.
There's no unfalsifiable. Okay. Does anybody have questions, or are you guys just all fighting amongst yourselves? DNA is not a code, and your hair looks really nice today, Shannon. Thanks.
So you're technically right. DNA itself is not a code. DNA is just a molecule. The code is the set of rules governing the communication system between DNA and the ribosome.
All right.
Technically, DNA, RNA, and the ribosome. Yeah.
DNA is not a code. There we go.
DNA is not a code, but the genetic code is a code. The genetic code is the code. DNA is not a code.
Zero sent a super chat. 0132132. Somebody, can we teach a ribosome to speak English? Troll joke question. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can field that one. No.
Oh, by the way, he asked a question on my channel. And I don't think I addressed it. It was when I was giving a presentation on the genetic code being code. He was the one that asked. I think he was the one that asked about is there any other coding system with so much junk in it? Because, referring to junk DNA. And again, the coding system itself is super clean in genetics, super clean. I mean, it's just this one little chart. But the messages written in our DNA are oftentimes very, very messy. And there's lots of reasons for that, which I could go into some of them. But basically, our DNA is filled with parasites. There are stretches of DNA that are not cooperating with us. They're actually parasitic. We call them jumping genes. We call them transposable units. There are chunks of DNA that come from viruses. There are genes that are dead. A mutation has killed them, so they're no longer useful. So there's lots of reasons why there's a bunch of garbage messages in our genome. It's like a YouTube comment section,
Not mine. Mine are all delightful.
Yeah.
People who watch my channel are all above average in their intellect and their interactions with one another.
Yeah.
All right, so Fred Knotts added me, and he said, "Ask Josh." Oh, Jon. Ask Jon. I'm assuming he's to explain why it doesn't have to be intelligently designed.
Why the code does not have to be intelligently designed? Okay.
Yeah.
So because we know that languages emerge, communication systems emerge, and the rules that govern them, they emerge every time. Now, almost every time we have two evolvable entities. So two evolving, usually organisms, that are evolving under selection pressure to cooperate. So, there's the goby and the shrimp, which I was talking about earlier. The goby and the shrimp, they cooperate. The shrimp digs the burrow, and the goby lives in that burrow. And the shrimp is almost blind in this case, the species that does this. And it will go out with the goby in search of food together. And they have a bunch of different signals that they'll send to each other. The goby will actually collect food that it doesn't like and give it to the shrimp. And the shrimp basically is the digger. It's the muscles in the relationship. And the goby acts as the eyes in the relationship. So they have a very complicated set of symbols that have evolved between these two species. There actually might be a little bit of learning there too, but it seems that they're instinctual, because even if you just put the two species together in an aquarium, they'll immediately start cooperating. It's as if they already know how to do this. So it seems like an evolved communication system, not a learned communication system, because you can actually develop one using your brain too. But natural selection can shape behaviors of organisms. And so it can create these communication systems. These communication systems can evolve, and different molecules that are replicating, that are evolving, can also develop communication systems between each other as they evolve under selection pressure to cooperate. And that's what we think the genetic code is. And the details on how this happened are not super clear. And that's what people studying the origin of life are trying to figure out. They're trying to get something like this to happen again under observation. They're trying to watch a communication system evolve between replicating molecules. It's one of the things that people are trying to do. So, it's interesting stuff.
So Wellington Smith, who's one of my amazing patrons, asked, "How long until you start saying about?"
Well, I'm in Montreal, so I'm going to be learning French, not
completely different accent there.
Yeah.
Very, very different accent.
My girlfriend doesn't say about. She speaks with a French accent.
Does anybody else have any other questions? There's all kinds. People are talking about pheromones. Everybody's what lovely discourse going on in the side chat here.
Cool.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, pheromones are evolved communication molecules. And they're communication molecules that people think that humans actually are probably tuned into, and we just we're never aware of them consciously. And if that's the case, I don't think it's actually been proven, but if that's the case, then we are communicating in a similar way to molecules, and that they're not actually aware of each other with their brains. They've just evolved to respond to these certain signals in different ways. So there's no awareness. This is something else that confuses people a lot. They think that in order for a flower to communicate with a bee, the flower must have some sort of awareness that the bee exists, some sort of mental image. We equate communication to thinking. That's not the case. Things that do not think can communicate because they can evolve these communication systems.
Interesting. And so it's a stimuli response sort of thing, as opposed to a transmitting symbols or sounds into cognition.
Yeah. And then in the genetic code, it's the specific three-dimensional shape of these molecules that interlock with each other inside the ribosome that cause this whole thing to work. So it works automatically because of the evolved structure of the ribosome and because of the evolved structure of the messenger RNA in this case. So it happens automatically. There's no thinking. When the genome communicates with the ribosome, there's no thought. It's just automatic. But it had to evolve that way. It's not a simple chemical reaction. It's a very specific, evolved chemical system.
Goodness. All right. So I lost my live chat because I suck at life. So 1 sec. Only the best for Shannon. Thanks. Not a question, just strong agree. This is from Michael W. Robel. I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, Michael. Not a question, just strong agreement with the designation of natural code versus constructed code. DNA is obviously a naturally evolved code. So here we go. We're recruiting more people to Team Jon. Riley S. Communication doesn't require awareness. I agree with Jon. Here we go. Oh, question from Kendall. Kendall's one of my Discord mods. I love Kendall. Cool. Question: how many possible proteins are there? Is it unlimited?
Proteins? Well, sort of. I guess you could say it's unlimited, except for that. There
has to be an upper limit to the amount of proteins.
There definitely is an upper limit, but it might as well be limitless because as far as any human mind is capable of conceiving, yes, it's limitless. But there is an upper limit because proteins, if you get them too big, they'll fall apart. But who knows? Maybe there's proteins that could evolve to support those other proteins. You could get a protein that just keeps evolving and fills the entire universe. End up using all matter that exists. But yeah, there would be a limit just based on size because a protein can be any size. And there are 20 different types of amino acids that are used in biology to build proteins. And they can be any size. So you could just keep making bigger ones. But yeah, if you have a size limit and you know that there's 20 different types, then yeah, you can do some math and figure out how many possibilities of proteins there are. But that assumes a size limit.
So what happens if your chart that you showed for what proteins each letter sequence,
which amino acid?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not a biologist, so I'm doing my best.
So the amino acids, an amino acid is a building block for a protein. So think of an amino acid as a Lego and a protein as a Lego house, right?
Okay, gotcha. All right. Yeah. So if there was a letter sequence that the ribosome didn't recognize, like a 3-letter sequence or chemical sequence, could it potentially code for a different amino acid that is detrimental to us or a brand new one? Are those possibilities?
So all of the possibilities are already taken. The genetic code uses every single one that's possible. So everything's already taken, but a lot of them are repetitive. So you can actually, by modifying tRNAs, it's kind of complicated to do this without very carefully constructed visuals to explain how this is working. But you can actually, in one experiment that biologists are doing, is they tweak the anticodons on tRNAs to invent new genetic codes that allow for new amino acids. So we do make artificial genetic codes, and we do that by modifying the anticodons on a tRNA. So,
all right, cool. Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions while we still have Jon? Use them all. If you have questions about biology and genetics and stuff, now's your time because I'm not gonna answer them for you. Shannon Q has a very active and personally satisfying Discord server. Take it. Oh, thanks, Christy. At me if you have any questions too. Christy's plugging my Discord server. Bless her heart. Thanks, Christy. I do. It's a lovely Discord server, and I do voice chats there. If you ever want to have a chit chat. I went on the other night and did that. It was fun. All right. Oh, Non Sequitur show's here, and they have a question. Uh-oh, is it Steve or Kyle is the question? Code or Cipher? Oh, it's Kyle.
Code or Cipher? Yeah.
Code or Cipher?
It depends on, well, if you want to use language that nobody else is using when they talk about this, then you could say it's a cipher. Well, actually, you know, you're gonna have to bring up the definition of code and cipher within that particular field. And I could tell you, you know, what I was looking at today, I was re-looking this up. I was seeing a cipher as defined as an algorithm that is used to encode and decode a message. The genetic code is not an algorithm; it's a set of symbols that are already set up in advance. So actually, from what I was looking at, it looks like the genetic code is actually better defined as a code even within cryptography. But again, I'm not really familiar with cryptography, so I couldn't tell you for sure.
Well, Non Sequitur show just declared you the winner. so now we know it's Kyle.
Okay.
Oh, that's funny. I declared the winner before it started, to be fair. I team John. I mostly did that to mess with Steve, but now I'm on your team anyway now.
Okay. All right.
Well, so
Steve,
go ahead.
I think Steve, I don't know if Steve was confused about the molecules as signals or symbols thing. If he was confused with that during the debate, I think that he might have been. But in a Facebook chat afterwards, he seemed to understand it. So I think he understands that, but he might still be not liking that I'm ignoring.
No, I don't think so. Because he posted on my Twitter and he said, you know, essentially that you both respect each other, which is great. Like it ended the way it should have, with people walking away, shaking hands, and being like, okay, well, we can agree that, you know, there's areas that we're going to disagree with, but. Yeah, so I think he would give that concession. Non Sequitur shows another question, serious question. Did you hear back from Sam Harris? And I'm assuming that's probably about, or did you get a response from Sam Harris about the? I'm assuming that's probably going to be what the meditation app. You may come here actually sometime soon, and we'll have.
Yeah. I like to talk about it with you here. So, I haven't heard from Sam Harris. So I didn't really expect to, but my thing there is that you know. Sam Harris is, by the definition of a religion used by certain philosophers, he's building a secular religion, which is cool. Like, it's cool that someone's trying to do this, where he's got a whole system of beliefs, of morals, and now of rituals to try and get people's minds kind of on track. And in this religion, he holds cool things to be sacred, cool things like, critical thinking and not worshiping people. Things, you know, he's got a whole set of really nice values set up. And I think this is really interesting because he seems to me to be creating a secular religion. People are very upset at me for using that word to describe what he's doing. I've had people that are super angry at me in the comments.
Because they probably don't know what the Durkheimian model of religion is, though. That's probably
I've got, even though I literally show it on screen when I'm talking about it, and also Sam Harris has used that word as derogatory. So the word religion is derogatory.
It's a dirty word to Sam Harris fans. Yeah,
but what Sam Harris is doing has inherent dangers that are different from what everybody else in the atheist community has been doing. Because up till now, people in the atheist community have been just being intellectuals, right? They go around and give talks about stuff that they're thinking about. He's different in that he's now starting a group he's whispering in their ears every morning, you know, through a meditative practice. And just that alone gives him a type of power over the people that are following him, because they're listening to him every morning, and they're meditating, and they're going into this slightly altered state of consciousness while listening to him. That gives
it actually his voice?
Yeah. It's actually him. So that's
Okay.
one of the things about this that's I don't even want to say it's concerning, because I don't really consider it concerning. There's potential for some weird stuff to happen with it.
Well, it would be concerning, though, if somebody had nefarious intent, because if you have that sort of suggestive power over a large group of people who are suggestible and are, prone to taking things that you say as, as being imbued with power and taking it seriously, then I suppose in his current state, as we see him as not having nefarious intent and having, ultimately good goals, then perhaps it could be, innocuous. But if his intentions
it could be
changed,
wonderful.
It could be wonderful, or it could be neutral, or if his intentions changed, it could be bad, depending on how many people he had influence over.
Right. My thing was that we should be aware that there are new dangers to this. It's very different than what other people are doing. He's actually coming into your home and whispering in your ear every morning for 10, 20 minutes. That's different. And he's having you breathe and meditate and do these different things. And that is just different. The relationship that you will build with him is different than the relationship you will build with Richard Dawkins when you watch one of his talks every month or something on YouTube and watch him debate somebody else. And it's different than the relationship that you built with Sam Harris up until now, where you have him debating with people or conversing with people on his show. So one of the things I noticed in his app is that he talks a lot about free will being an illusion, or not even illusion. The illusion that free will is an illusion is an illusion. But this is something that he debated with people, and people had been on his show debating against him on this. But now he's got a platform where they're not there, and it's just him. So you meditate, and then you listen to one of these lessons. And so you're in this state where Sam Harris just made me feel good. He helped me breathe and relax. And now I'm going to listen to his lesson. It eliminates all the conflicting voices in that debate, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, he's got good information, and he's sharing that.
He gives lessons afterwards, so it's not just about introspection. It's about, so he puts you into an induced, relaxed, suggestive state, and then after that happens, he gives you his own version of an affirmation lesson.
Yes, but they're not. It's not like required as part of the meditation. So he has a series of lectures in the app, and he has a series of meditation.
So it's not
things
part of the process,
right?
Just sort of tertiary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is some teaching he does as part of the process, but it's all about how to breathe properly, or how to, it's technique based. So it's not.
I need to download this app yesterday, because I need.
Right. So all I'm saying is what's going to happen is people are going to develop a relationship with him. It's very different than what they've developed with him in the past. And he doesn't seem to have acknowledged this fact, because when you have him doing this every morning with you, it's just a very different relationship. And this is why yogis, gurus have so much power over their followers. People fall in love is the wrong word. People develop this great respect for their religious leaders. Mm-hmm. That you could say it's kind of like falling in love. You have this reverence towards leaders, which is inevitable if you're having him show you meditation and you get a bunch from meditation. You want to be thankful to him. You want to attribute that to him. You'll have people that like listening to him do the meditation thing, but don't like listening to anybody else. Which, I mean, there's a lot of people are like, you're crazy for being concerned about this. This is just meditation. It's just breathing exercises and so on. And I get that. He's not asking people to, there's a guru that came to California, and one of the funny things he would do is he'd have people drink his pee.
No. This isn't the Non Sequitur show. we don't do that.
He'd give them cups of urine, and he'd say, this tastes like roses. He'd have them drink it after a meditation session, and they'd agree it tastes like roses. But this is an example of how powerful meditation is.
I don't even know if I want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Ruined my day.
But just imagine being this guy in India. You start out your career as, a nobody. You end up being successful in India. You end up getting money. You travel to the United States. And you got all these rich California dudes drinking your pee. That's got to be like the ultimate.
I can't talk to you anymore.
That's got to be the ultimate FU to American culture,
Oh my
like,
God.
Look at all these suckers. They can do anything. But I don't think Sam's going to do anything weird like that. But he's setting himself up to have the power to do anything he wants. Like, his followers could fall in love with him in that sort of way, where they trust him in this ultimate. And I don't think he's trying. I don't think that's his aim. But that certainly is something that could happen. And the people that are mad at me for being concerned about this, I would say that, if you are not at least a little bit suspicious of what could happen to you if you let someone whisper in your ear every single morning, if you're not suspicious at all about that, I think you're ripe for exploitation. Again, Sam is not someone that I think is wanting to go out and exploit people, but the fact that you are angry at me, calling me names because I'm telling you that this is something to be, keep an eye on, is it tells me that there's
telling.
yeah. So, and I've had a lot of angry people at me. I'd say the comments are mostly negative there and on that video, but
really, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I found it pretty interesting.
Well, there's quite a few good ones, and there's a lot of them. I think by number, if you scroll down a little bit, the better ones have been voted up, But if you scroll down a bit, you'll just see people that are super pissed. They're just raging that I would even consider that Sam Harris could do anything exploitive, But anyway, I'm using the app, and it's cool to learn how to meditate. And I think mindfulness it's a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And
there's something to be said for him encouraging that.
Yeah.
Encouraging mindfulness and encouraging introspection and putting yourself into a state that allows you to remove some of the outer obstacles so that you can focus on introspective analysis. That's something not a lot of people take the time to do, and it's valuable. But how it's conducted is important, because if you are susceptible to suggestion, if you're somebody who's easily led, then it can put you in a dangerous state where you could be, manipulated, taken advantage of, and exploited.
Yeah. And I have this kind of little prediction in my head that in the future we'll have these people that are like, oh, did you meditate today? Oh, you're not a very good Sam Harris-site or whatever. Harris-site, that sounds bad. That sounds like parasite. Good Sam Harriton. There we go. You're not a good Sam Harriton.
You're not follow the doctrine of Sam. All right, but do we have any more questions? I kept Jon over because that was fascinating. Any more questions before we go? Going once. At me quick. All right, I think that we're good. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining in. Don't forget to check out the original debate is in the description, as well as both of Jon's channels. Go subscribe to them right now. If you're watching this later, I still mean it. Do it right now. And also the links to, I have stuff, like I have Twitter and a Patreon and a PayPal and a Discord, and those are there. They're cool too. You do that, I guess. I'm such a good self-promoter. It's amazing.
Yeah, so you're great.
Doesn't feel awkward at all. Okay, cool. So thank you very much. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing. I've got the video, What is DNA and How Does It Work, which talks a little bit about the genetic code, but I have a whole lesson on Stated Casually where I go for like an hour about what the genetic code is. So if anything I was saying was confusing today and you want to learn more about that, go check out that video. I think that's the most thorough one that I've done. It's just called What is the Genetic Code?
Cool. All right. And no, Riley, you got it in. I don't think Kanye will win in 2020. And I hope that's a joke. I'm Canadian, so if it isn't, less affecting me. John's kind of Canadian now.
Well, yeah, I'm not a citizen, but
You wish.
I'm still an
We're
Oregonian. All right.
at heart. We'll get you
Yeah.
eventually. All right, guys. Have a good night. Don't forget to do all the subscribing and whatever is in the thing down below the video. Go do that. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye, chat.